So it's our third and final day of our 2020 annual research meeting today. I imagine that we'll have some folks continuing to trickle in, but we've got a lot to cover, so I think let's get started. Many of you know me. My name is Jessica Martyr-Kenyon. I'm a postdoc at the Peanut Innovation Lab Management Entity at UGA. I'm a human environment geographer by training, and my primary role at the lab is managing our gender and youth research and related activities. I also conduct some independent research as part of the lab. Let's go on to the next slide, Allison. I just wanted to reiterate some of the basic logistics for the meeting. I think we're all pretty familiar with this by now, but we are recording these sessions and we'll make them available to you after the meeting. Also, if you're interested in sharing them with colleagues that weren't able to attend this week, that could be a useful resource for them as well. For just kind of ease of doing business here, we're asking that people keep their microphone muted and use the chat window to provide comments and questions. You know, if we have time after some of the presentations, we may be able to answer some of those here today, but if not, we'll also be recording the questions and feedback that come in through the chat window, and we'll pass them on to PIs as that comes. Thanks, Allison. So as you're also all aware, we at the lab kind of have categorized our research into these 4 areas of inquiry. We've heard a lot from those first 2, varietal development and value-added gains, in the last 2 days. Today, we are going to be rounding out or wrapping up the value-added gains section this morning with a presentation from Richard Dick on their optimized shrub systems project in Senegal. We also have Mark Manary and J.S. Wang presenting from our nutrition research areas. So that's some pretty fascinating work that's happening in Ghana on school feeding and on gut microbiome analyses in Uganda. And then finally, we have several projects that fall under our gender and youth research area, and that's kind of what I'd like to make a few comments on this morning. So next slide. Research is, of course, at the core of our gender and youth related activities at the lab. As I mentioned, we've got several projects that fall explicitly under that research area. Gender and youth are cross-cutting themes across all of our project areas, but the Peanut Lab was one of the first innovation labs to invest specifically in gender and youth research as a concerted area. So our projects in this area of inquiry have a lot of cross-cutting thematic linkages and methodological linkages between them. So there are different ways that you can kind of group them together, but I've decided to do it this way. We've got 2 projects that we'll be hearing from this morning that are focused on understanding barriers and opportunities for engaging young people, both rural and urban, in the peanut value chain. As we know, Africa has a very large youth population. They're the future of agriculture on the continent, and figuring out how to make agriculture a viable livelihood for them is something that we care a lot about. We also have 2 projects that are engaging in a pretty new and exciting area of research focused on time use and time poverty, specifically or particularly women's time poverty. So understanding how household dynamics, power structures, relationships between men and women, and women's dual responsibility for productive and reproductive labor affects their ability to capture the gains of peanut agriculture. And then finally, we've got some work that I'm part of, and Nick Magnan presented some work, his work on Ghana yesterday, that looks at gender dynamics of commercialization and privatization. So we've got some work on contractual arrangements that Nick presented yesterday. And I'll take a few minutes this morning and describe what I'm up to in Malawi. We at the management entity are also quite focused on kind of collaboratively understanding how to achieve an integration or a better integration of gender theory and concepts and social science principles more generally into our other areas of inquiry. And I think that's something it's challenging. It's challenging to all of us, but we have, I think, made some useful impact so far. And I think it's a conversation that we plan to continue having throughout the remainder of the lab. The next slide, Allison. So Jamie had mentioned yesterday the broader project that we've got with Agdiv in Malawi. And I just wanted to mention some work that I've been conducting this year. So we have colleagues at the University of Connecticut that did a fairly large household survey of peanut and groundnut farmers in Malawi a couple of years ago. And one of the findings from that survey was that there is significant variation in groundnut planting time, which has led to reductions in yield. And I went in January to do some qualitative research to try and uncover the reasons or factors that lead to that variation. I won't discuss the results now, but hopefully I will at a future meeting. But I do just want to highlight also that I think we've had a lot of interest from our partners, the government of Malawi, USAID, and the private sector in Malawi to figure out ways to ensure that this transition away from tobacco into crops like groundnut affects men and women in equitable ways. So we've been proposing some work, for example, more gender sensitive contracting processes, and we're working with our partners there now to figure out how to implement some of those ideas. Okay, next slide. Just before we get to our presentations today, I also wanted to mention that we at the management entity have tried to invest quite a bit in capacity building for ourselves, our scientists, our students, and the communities that we work in very broadly. So a couple of presenters mentioned the great training, the gender responsive researchers equipped for agricultural transformation training that we did in Kampala earlier this year in March. That was a 3-day training that we designed in conjunction with our great colleagues at Manary, gender experts that have developed curriculum specifically for agricultural researchers working in Africa. So we had, I think, at least 30, the majority of our East African scientists and students who came. There's a picture of us all there on this slide. It really was a great success. I think it was 3 days. We focused on everything from sort of gender theory around concepts such as bias, femininity and masculinity, all the way down to some of the more nitty-gritty ways that one can integrate gender into research practice. Again, I think this is something that we view, as the beginning of a conversation that will continue over the next couple of years. And we're also planning, COVID dependent, to have similar trainings in West Africa, in English and in French sometime in the near future. And then lastly, I want to mention that we've been a bit engaged in trying to push out a gender message to our community at UGA. Helga, who's on our external advisory panel, Allison and I delivered a gender and agricultural research workshop at UGA in December for scientists and students there. We've also been participating in USAID's efforts to build communities of practice around gender and youth-related research. And of course, we're here to support all of you in ensuring that the trainings and workshops and research efforts that you're involved in are as inclusive of gender, women, men, young people, and children as possible. So I think, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for being part of the Innovation Lab. As it says on the slide, we, I think those of us who were attending the great training in March really did benefit from being together in the same place. It's nice to have these formal and informal spaces to get together. And so, although I think we all wish we could be together in the same place or in the same physical place, at least we're all here virtually today. I think our first presenter is going to be Richard Dick on the OSS project. So maybe we can get those slides up and I'll hand it over to you guys.
Okay, I'm Richard Dick. I'm at Ohio State University working on a project in Senegal. We're basically in the first year of our project focused on really dealing with soils and so forth, trying to work at remediation of soils and how that affects crop productivity and so forth. So we can next slide. So just a little bit of the background. This system that we're testing, pilot testing in farmers' fields is the result of basically 20 years of research on shrub intercropping systems. And so we've had a team of Senegalese, primarily French and US scientists working on this. And so it's a lot of basic research in hydrology, microbiology, agronomy, plant nutrition. But all of this work was done for the most part on research plots, but also there was satellite work in farmers' fields, but with the opportunity with the peanut lab, and since a major crop that we worked with all these years is peanut, we worked with the peanut millet rotation. It was logical to take the next step to pilot test this system. So go to the next slide. So I'm sure everybody here is quite aware of the issues for the Sahel, but it's been active ecologically as to how the landscapes are managed. And there's just a lot of challenges in terms of the soils and then the semi-arid environment, low rainfall, and really a challenge with these soils that tend to be sandy and low fertility to start with. And by and large, as I'm sure everybody's here aware, green revolution technologies, fertilizers and so forth are really not used very much, if at all, in these systems. Next slide. And so this is just a reminder of the challenge for the Sahel. Basically, yields are staying the same, and by and large, the 60, 70, or 80, 90% of the population that depend basically feed themselves locally. Yields have not gone up, and what this slide is showing here is the exponential increase in population, and the way basically the people are managing this to provide enough food is by increasing the acreage, the hectares under production. And that's the line there in the dotted line of millet production. So, but ultimately, as population goes up, rural populations, the land available can no longer increase. So we're on a collision course here in a way, if we don't raise the yields, which is shown down here for millet. And so this is a major challenge for the Sahel, and how do you do that without, at least so far, having a lot of external inputs to raise the yields. So that's the challenge that we're up against, and the soils and managing organic matter is a key part of the solution. Next slide. So this work goes back quite a while, long story, how we got interested in shrubs, but a challenge for the Sahel is, where do you get organic matter? And organic matter, my colleagues in Senegal and other places in Africa have shown that especially in these drier environments, sandy soils, you need organic inputs. And where do you get that? Of course, manures and so forth are available, but if you spread all of that over the landscape, it doesn't go very far. So we need a local resource. And so it turns out that two species are found in farmers' fields throughout the Sahel. They tend to be at low densities. Garrett senegalensis in the north where it's drier, and Pelystigma reticulatum where it's a little bit wetter and the soils are heavier. And so, long story, but ultimately we've capitalized on this opportunity to start to think about, could we use this biomass remediating soils, and how does that affect? Is it good or bad for soils? Asked a lot of questions in the beginning. Next slide. System, especially for Senegal and much of the Sahel, although Burkina Faso, they're not so much into this particular system of burning, but essentially what happens is these shrubs are in farmers' fields at relatively low densities, and they coppice them in the spring, cut them and let them dry, put them in piles, and then unfortunately burn it. So as a soil scientist, when we first got involved, you know, we really felt it's unfortunate that we're losing this organic matter. Anyway, this led to all kinds of questions. That farmers do things for good reasons, and ultimately pursued this system to see if we could alter how we manage this organic matter. And you can see on the left-hand lower corner, you just end up with these stark landscapes of where the organic matter is just stripped from the landscape, and the soils are not getting the organic inputs that are needed. Then the farmers plant the crop. The shrubs, of course, come back during the growing season, and then this cycle typically happens all over again. Next slide. So after a lot of research, we've been studying this, what we call an optimized shrub intercropping system. So the typical density in farmers' fields today, and we had one PhD student who worked on this, like where shrubs are in the landscape and so forth. And basically, there's roughly 200 to 300 shrubs per hectare in a typical farmer's field. Some fields there's absolutely none. And as I said, most of the time, they typically burn that residue. So we developed a system where we increased the shrub density to approximately 1,500 shrubs per hectare. And then instead of burning, the residue is put back in the soil. And so this is some of our long-term sites near Ches, Senegal. And you can see the plots on the right are the plus shrub plots where the litter's incorporated. And this is sort of a visual indicator of the response that we're getting. So roughly, we're getting roughly 3 or even more tons of dry biomass going into the soil, which is really a significant amount for the Sahel, where we have, you know, because of the semi-arid environment, low net primary productivity. Next slide. So the system basically is quite simple in practice. We coppice, we still coppice, but then the residue is chopped and put in the soil, the no burning. And then the other step is that we're increasing the density. And this is one of our cooperating farmers in our pilot study, where she's been planting these seedlings, in this case, Gara senegalensis seedlings, and increasing the density. So those are the main components of the system. Next slide. So this research, yeah, as I've said, with this incorporation of residue, we're increasing the soil quality. One of the really interesting findings is that we've actually proven that these shrubs bioirrigate adjacent crops. And this is really significant for the Sahel. These shrubs go very deep. They go down about at least 10 meters, if not more, down to the top of the water table. And they literally move water through the roots at night when photosynthesis stops in the shrubs, and it leaks out and bioirrigates the adjacent crops. Don't have time to go into all that, but it does. What we've found is that in dry years or in in-season drought, this can be really very helpful to get crops through this lower, when there's lower rainfall and drought conditions. So it improves in nutrient efficiency, especially microbial diversity is increased. And sequestration of carbon and so forth. And another important thing is that it reduces the days to harvest, which is important for a semi-arid environment, because the sooner you can get your crop in and out of the field, that's important because you reduce the chances of having issues like, especially end of the year, rainfall shortage. So, and actually the system works, the drier and the poorer the soil, the more the system works. So I would say the further south you go, in wetter, the system is not the best adapted. Once you get above 1,000 millimeters, it isn't, I think then you start to see competition. But in these drier soils, a drier environment, poor soils, this is where the system really kicks in. And this is shown, these plots here are near Ches, where it's roughly 500 millimeters rainfall per year. Next slide. So the objectives of our Peanut Lab program project is we really wanted to pilot test this system with farmers' fields, and particularly peanut and millet with rotation. We've had focus sessions to kick it off, to get input on adapting and what farmers felt about the system and using shrubs. And they're very familiar with these shrubs. They already understand that they potentially can help them. And well, we don't have time to go into all that, but they are aware of them and of the potential value. And so part of this is then also to do a peanut value chain gender analysis, looking at basically labor issues, because we do recognize that it's going to increase the labor. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Then the second component is to do peanut variety trials and some fertility, sort of a very, with limited funding, we're also trying to do a little bit of fertility work to see if there's some nutrients that may be limiting yields in this peanut system, because we've kind of sensed that from our long-term plots. I don't have time to go into all that here, but we are pursuing that. But the main idea with the peanut varieties is the question, is to see if there are cultivars that are better adapted for shrub intercropping. So trying to get some variation, especially in duration of the varieties, because we actually think that we can put longer duration varieties, which are higher yielding, because of the bioirrigation. So we have varieties we've chosen that have different duration. And as much as we can, we're trying to get some variation in root architecture to see how that interacts with the shrub intercropping system. And then thirdly, we're doing monitoring of agronomic and socioeconomic parameters, cost benefit initiative analysis, and also the Women's Empowerment and Agriculture Index. Next slide. So we basically a year ago, and I'll have to say it was been a challenge to get this project going, because first of all, it took 6 months between USAID to get our contract signed, and then we had also problems between Ohio State's bureaucracy and the bureaucracy in Ches or the University of Ches, and so we actually were doing focus sessions and finding farmers before there was even $1 in Senegal to do the work. That was a little over a year ago, and we were struggling with that. But we're past all of that, and things are moving much smoother now, except for the COVID issue. But we do have 15 farmers for each in species to work on in the north where it's drier and in the south where it's wetter, with 2 different species. And basically we've set up, last summer we established an optimized system that is side by side with the traditional system, where the traditional system, if you burn, if you get rid of shrubs, if you don't like shrubs, keep that going on the traditional side, and then on the optimized side, we've increased the density. So that was established. We had some challenges at the southern site. We lost some seedlings last year, but we're going to try to replace those. So that's the basic idea for the on-farm testing. We're up and running. We had some students out there collecting some labor data last summer. Kind of got stalled, some of the analysis with well, it's actually didn't really finish till November because of the way the season goes. So next slide. So this is the team that's involved. There's those of us, myself and Amanda Davey at Ohio State. You can kind of see who's outlined here, but I'll just point out Ibrahima Jeju is a key code writer, really makes everything happen, and the other folks shown here as well. And I was hoping that Idrissa and Katim could be on today, and Ibrahima, because they, especially for the initial data we've collected, with the socioeconomic baseline, they've been involved with getting that going. And unfortunately, they have they're dealing with students at the university, so they're not able to be on the call today. So other key folks are Thumb Isra. Issa Faye is the plant breeder, and he's the peanut breeder, and he's taking the lead with the on-farm, the variety testing, and Alfred Tain is also helping out with the soil fertility. Next slide. So the progress to date is we've got the plots established. We've had some focus sessions. We also had another follow-up meeting. Actually, Ibrahima had a meeting in last February, just before the COVID thing hit, and had a really good meeting. And in fact, he initially, just especially at the Mecca site, he had called, just invited the purchasing farmers, and I think twice as many other farmers showed up at that meeting just out of interest because they saw what was happening. So we're excited to hear that. We've begun some of the baseline survey data, and I think at this point I'm going to ask Amanda, if she's on, she could go over, present some of where we're at in terms of the survey data and with the WEAI surveys. Amanda, are you there?
Hi, sure. Sorry, I was answering comments. Hi, I'm Amanda Davey with Ohio State, and I just wanted to say thank you to the Peanut Lab for organizing this. It's been great to see our work so far. So yeah, so we had to, because of COVID-19, delay our large-scale household survey for the peanut value chain and gender analysis, and we're hoping to do that in the fall, if all willing, or in next spring. And then as far as the WEA, I've just received from our co-PIs in Senegal the data, and they did a great job. It looks really good. So I'm undertaking right now to analyze that with them. And then my hope is to meet with Jessica and talk about ways, depending on what we find, to tailor our trainings next fall to address any gender gaps that we see. But yeah, so that's where we are, and hopefully able to continue this season in light of COVID.
Right. I think, yeah, the other points here are, you can see where we're at. We're basically most of this information. So if you can go to the next slide. So the COVID definitely has thrown a wrench into our work. And we put this PowerPoint together. We were still hoping some things might come together, but the problem in Senegal is they've basically closed down movement between regions, which is not exactly like a US county, but it's a little bit bigger than that. But it basically means our Israel people aren't able to get to our long-term sites. We can't get to the farmer, or Ibrahim and our folks at the university can't get to the, actually physically can't get to the farmer sites. So that's created a challenge. And so we've, a number of things. We were supposed to have we had planned to have a field day in late August, early September, and we've basically postponed that. And another key part, which isn't listed here, is that to work at the labor issue, we've been having an ongoing relationship even before this project with Papa Jope, who's the ag engineer up in San Luis, to develop a mechanized way to manage the biomass and to chop it and incorporate and be able to work at the issue of managing that biomass in the spring. And we were planning to pilot test a couple of different ways. We're considering a system where it moves through the field and chops the shrub as it grows, or another stationary, more like the wood, familiar with the wood chippers in the US. We want to test that stationary one, which has better options because it can be used for other things like in the chopping for fodder for animals and other types of uses. So we had hoped to really work on it this summer, but Pop Schultz is stuck up in San Luis. And then we were also going to have a demonstration, use it as part of our field day, 1 or 2 day field day, and actually test this and get feedback from farmers and other the stakeholders, not only farmers, but also the Extension Service, ANCAR and so forth, and some NGOs to have sort of to work at this issue of mechanization. But unfortunately, we're going to have to hold off for a year on that. And the same thing is, I think we were hoping to do the variety trials this summer, but they just can't get to the fields. We are able to sort of semi-manage the long-term plots to keep the biomass, keep that system going. But since people can't travel between regions and it's still locked down, we're thinking we're still a chance, but we're thinking that we're probably going to have to postpone these variety trials till next summer. But we are trying to. So maybe I should jump. There's a question I can answer quickly here about why do farmers burn? Well, farmers burn because they like to see a nice clean seedbed, and that was one of the first questions we had. Is farmers have been in business a long time. I mean, millet was domesticated 4,000 years ago, so that they like to see a nice clean seedbed, and so we thought that maybe that was an issue, like germination and planting and so forth. But in our research, and we farm on our plots and even in the farmers' fields, we use the exact same equipment and hand labor like the farmers do, but we chop the residues into pieces about this big and then distribute it in the soil. And we find that there's absolutely no problem. Germination and managing planting with establishment, you do not need to burn. So it's a partially, they like to see clean seed beds because originally they were just thinking about long stems, and that would potentially get in the way of their planting equipment. But if you chop it up, that's not an issue. So it does raise an issue though of labor, and that's part of the other reason why they burn. Is just easier to put a match to it than to deal with it. So, but they do recognize the benefit of getting any type of organic matter in the soil. And we're seeing that in the farmers in the north, especially with the Mecca in the drier region. They really seem to be, as I said, they're actually asking for, farmers around them are actually asking for seedlings, of shrub seedlings. So anyway, probably running out of time here. So the remaining activities are peanut chain gender analysis survey, and then, as I said, I think we actually have 2 variety. We just lived Ches here, but we actually have variety trials both at Ches and Nero, one with Pellistigma and one with and Ches with Garrus senegalensis. So, but we think it's up in the air. Maybe we can pull these off this summer. It's unclear. It depends really how quickly it opens up. Izza just sent an email or a response. It sounds like it might actually open up. So maybe we have a chance to get these in the field this year. We'll see. Next slide. I think that, yeah, that's it. So
Hey, Richard,
again, yeah, thanks for the opportunity to present this. And I think the meetings are going quite well and probably very informative to find out what everybody's doing. I don't know if we have time for questions, maybe not. I've lost track of time here.
Yeah, I think we should probably move on to Mark's presentation, but Amanda, did you have something to add?
Oh, just, since we're out of time, I was just wondering, someone asked about disease shrubs, and I was wondering if Richard could address that, but maybe he could just write a comment.
Okay. Yeah, and we, you know, I mean, hopefully this is something that we can, a conversation that we can continue offline as well. And I also just want to say, as I mentioned to you in the chat box, Amanda, that I think that there are lots of synergies that we have between this project and some of the other projects looking at time use. And it would be good to get together as a group and discuss them.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Cool. Okay, so we're moving on to nutrition now, at least in this current presentation. We're going to be hearing from Mark Manary on peanuts and school feeding.
Thank you very much for including us in the PIL projects. And we want to take the power of peanuts into school feeding. Next slide. Our research team involves the University of Ghana, where we have Tilly and Salia, and Washington University, where Donna and I are, and we're all online today. And then Project Peanut Butter, which is a industrial NGO in Ghana, which will be making the food. Next slide. And our project has two phases. It's a 4-year project, and the first one is that we are going to develop this peanut-based school food. And as we all know right now, there's a premium, there's a missing element because we don't have school in session, so people are missing their school meals. And then the kinds of school meals that are been traditionally used aren't COVID friendly. You know, they involve lots of community eating and community preparation methods and all kinds of things going together. So we have developed over the last year some ready to eat foods that are supplemented with lots of micronutrients so that they are presenting a pretty complete meal. And we will talk a little bit more about where we are with that thing. And we are still hoping, although hoping is a good word here with some tentativeness, that we will be able to actually do a clinical trial around this, and that's in phase 2. So next slide. The background of school feeding in Ghana isn't probably not too dissimilar to anywhere else. About 1 in 5 kids receive a school meal. There's a tremendous, you know, world-class model system for school feeding in Ghana, which involves 9 different government agencies. And we have had some experience previously doing a trial in the middle of the country in Brangahafo, where we showed that with a milk protein, there's improved cognition, which is really at the core of why you go to school. But in reality, the kids are receiving school meals in Ghana about 1 out of every 1/3 of the time. They're reasonably costly, 23 cents a day. There's inconsistent funding, of course, and you know, since it involves so many different sectors, there's cooks and shoppers and et cetera and et cetera. And so school meals really in reality are not being provided as consistently as to make them very valuable. Next slide. So we have had some experience already in Ghana, our group, with a school snack that the Hershey company generously provides. And this feeds 50,000 kids a day, which is going on now 6-7 years, working on our 7th year. When working with that project, we have 3 different flavors of a basically peanut butter with micronutrient combination. And that's ginger, peanut, and cocoa. So we're going to take advantage of the fact that those are all 3 very acceptable and desirable tastes and flavors and organoleptic properties as we move ahead with a larger school food portion. Next slide. So this is just to reiterate that we have experience doing large clinical trials, and actually ours is one of the few and first in the world to actually show that you can do something about cognition, not just about school attendance. And so we're promoting a rethinking of school feeding as something that can be beneficial to the students that day. Next slide. So we had 5 criteria when developing this food. We wanted to minimize refined sugar. We needed the fat content to be at least 28% to accommodate what we need to do in our food processing and make it ready to eat. We didn't want it to have any bitter aftertaste or subjectively feeling particles in your mouth after swallowing. We need the food to be able to be poured in the factory, and our goal is less than 11 cents for the cost of production of this meal. All right, we use linear programming, which I think if you know me, I'll often be mentioning that, which is a way of incorporating any available local ingredients that are cost effective. And that's the basis of the recipes that we tried. Next slide. And here's what we did for our development this last year. Using the flavors that I talked about, we made over 100 recipes in December and January, and based on that, we picked 2, and we sent them to the Ghana FDA, which has approved them for distribution as school foods. So in that sense, we have step 1 of the regulatory approval. Next slide. And what's in this stuff? Peanut, palm oil, sugar, maize, corn, cowpea. The one has milk, the other one doesn't have milk, and micronutrients. So these are Ghana-friendly ingredients. The only one in the milk group is the one you wouldn't find there locally, but everything else is. And in particular, we've had lots of good clinical evidence coming from a legume project based on cowpea, showing that this can have beneficial effects on child growth and gut health. So next slide. Here we show you the food in a mixer at WashU and the packages that we intend to distribute. Next slide. And here's where we are right now. We want to take this food for acceptability testing up in the north. Everything that USAID wants to sponsor in Ghana is primarily focused in the north of the country. And since school is not in session, we're anticipating, hoping, working toward just testing it in the community. And it's important that we test it for a couple of weeks or so, because of course, anybody having one delicious meal of these 2, either of these recipes is probably going to say that's great, but is it something that even with the variations in flavors, you can consistently be the basis of a meal? If for any reason that's not the case, we will you start incorporating a biscuit with it, bread, or we've made up some special nutritious peanut biscuits already for that particular use. Next slide. And we need to add sugar, Helga, because this has got a very, we're giving about half of the micronutrients they need in a day. And this is salt, and this is bitter. So there's really not a way to get around that. We titrated in our recipe development and used the very minimum amount of sugar that we could. Production will be up there at Project Peanut Butter. And this is some factory views of our factory. We take peanuts from another project that you've heard about and other sources in Ghana that Nick was talking about yesterday, and you can see in the top left one is the mixing and final food processing preparation, and the top right and bottom left are peanut processing. You recognize that they're doing. And the one down in the corner is just meant to be humorous because it looked like we were going to lose it that day we put that new device in. All right, next slide. So with our clinical trial, we are wanting to look at growth and cognition as our primary outcomes, and linear growth, and then secondary, body mass index and other, anthropometry growth outcomes, as well as tolerance. It's great, but is it great for all school year? Next slide. And where we are located is going to be like I said, in the northern region. So if you see the map of Ghana there, it's a little bit busy, but where we were in Tamale last year, if you just take that road to the east and you move out on, we're going to be working with some schools that are either along that road or within 10 kms of that road. And it's Mayon district. And you can see the schools there and the eligible numbers of kids at these schools. So that's going to be plenty to enroll. The other circle on the map shows you where the food is made in Kumasi. Next slide. And northern Ghana is a pretty basic, typical subsistence farming, sub-Saharan Africa place, and you can see some views of daily life there. Next slide. What we would anticipate is the school year starts around in September, and that we would be at these schools, and we're going to randomize by child because that's going to give us the most powerful comparison of this different foods. So it's going to be involved. These schools don't have school feeding as we speak now, so we're going to need to organize a standard school feeding going on at the schools, as well as the ones we're testing with the peanut and the peanut milk. And we had done school projects before. What we do is we have a large community meeting. The parents come, everything's explained. They think about it. They can sign the consent. They cannot. Children will then be randomized into 1 of 3 groups, and we're shooting for 6 to 9-year-olds, about 1,000 kids. Next slide. As I said, our outcomes are going to be anthropometrics, cognition, and body composition. And we'll talk a little bit more about the cognition, I think, on the next slide. Yeah. So our measure of cognition is something the Cambridge Analytical Standardized Test Battery, and that is something that's been used since about 1980. So it's got a long history and been used in many, many, many other groups. And there are, it's a tablet-based test. It's a language-independent test. So it doesn't really, we're not really counting on explaining too much to the students. And we've had experience in Ghana using this test in this age group in actually several thousand testing sessions. So we know that students are able to utilize it. The test we'll be looking particularly at 5 particular outcomes, and the test is, that's a good way to describe it. I'm not sure across who. You're presented with shapes and colors on a tablet, and then you're presented with choices of what either the next one in a series is or what a matching one would be, and you need to make that, and you guess. And then it tells you whether you're right or wrong. And so, of course, the first time you guess, you're wrong, and then finally you're right, and maybe you think you've got the right system, and then you change it over to the next question. You try that, maybe you're right, maybe you're not. It's pretty, so there's some of the tests are measuring more a higher level executive function, and some are more basic. And what we found with the previous study was that food of any kind helps people with the basic tests, but food with milk in it had upper, higher level executive function benefits for these kids. So, and next slide, I'll be moving along. I'm probably not going to answer questions. So anyway, I think you've heard about this. We have a pretty solid, airtight system of making sure that the children would get their designated food every day. There'll be lots of color coding and monitors to assure that that's going on. Children will be given food for a minimum. They'll be given food whole school year, but between the different tests, the pre and post tests, will be at least 16 weeks. Next slide. As I said, we have lots of controls in place to assure that the children are receiving the food that they should assign to. Next slide. And participation. We'll be testing sort of at some selected subgroup of kids at the midpoint and at the end. We did see in our previous study that even after 7 weeks of feeding, there was improvements in cognition. And so the feeding that's going to go on for at least 4.5 months should definitely have that effect. Next slide. Our timeline, which I have to say, you notice we're up here in the right upper corner. The food development has been extended, and this is partly because of COVID, not because we can't do the COVID work here in St. Louis, but because we haven't, we would have, I think, wanted to be doing acceptability testing in February or sometime like that. So we'll see if the school opens in the fall. Our full intention is to be there and be doing the work. Next. So we are looking forward to bringing the power of peanuts to the children of Ghana. And as I said, this is a COVID-friendly intervention because it reduces the communal nature of the food preparation as well as the food consumption. And next slide. I think that should be it. So thanks to certainly PIL, but I also want to call out 2 of the US peanut groups that also are supporting this study, which are Birdsong Peanuts and the National Peanut Board. And
great, thank you, Mark. There's a couple questions over there in the chat box. You've caught us up with about 4 minutes of time. So if you want to take a minute or two to respond to 1 or 2 of those.
I don't see them, so let me try to look at them. I think that the peanuts grown locally in Ghana for sure. Are any high leg peanuts? Well, we know that they were introduced last year, but we haven't been able to access those in any sufficient quantity. How are you going to do with peanut allergies? There basically is no peanut allergy. The whole issue of food allergies is primarily a North American and European problem, and it comes with an explanation of that would be that the child, when they're born, the child's gut is trying to figure out what's food and what's germs, and so anything that it sees in larger quantities and regularly, it's going to call a food, and it's not going to make an immunologic reaction against that. Anything that it sees rarely or something shows up in the diet later in life or something in very small quantities, it's going to call that a germ and then make an allergic reaction to it. So, honestly, not making things up, but in hundreds of thousands. I mean, these 50,000 children who are fed every day, they're not the same 50,000, of course. I mean, we've never had a complaint about peanut allergy. So, it really isn't on the table there. What and where do students eat at school under the status quo? Really, Nick, they just get their plate and grab a corner. There's not a lunchroom. They're not eating in their classroom. They're hanging around outside. So I think I'll stop there, and I know there's other people that want to say things, but.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and again, hopefully we'll have time to continue this conversation in another forum. Our next presentation is from Leland Glenna on their time use study in Ghana.
Thank you, Jessica. Next slide, please, Allison. So we are proposing to study a concept called time poverty. And I'll explain that a little bit more later, but basically our argument is that enhancing peanut production will improve lives for smallholder women farmers, since women are primarily the peanut growers. However, there are labor-intensive, it is a labor-intensive crop with time constraints at critical points. So the question is if we can intervene with some time-enhancing and time-saving technologies, perhaps we could enhance women's ability to produce peanuts more efficiently and also and gain some added income. Women, smallholder farmers tend to be time poor, and usually more so than men, based on other studies that have been done on these issues. Therefore, this idea of introducing time and labor-saving technologies could benefit these women. However, one of the things we are going to explore is whether there could be an ironic effect where the introduction of time and labor-saving technologies could limit adoption. One of the issues here is the concept of, or the issue of simultaneity. Many women may do multiple tasks at the same time. Therefore, introducing a technology to do one of those tasks more efficiently could interfere with the completion of one of the other tasks. Therefore, there's the need to understand how time use fits into their daily routine. Another issue is that we're going to follow is whether the introduction of new technologies might disempower women, since often when a new technology is introduced or a new practice that leads to added revenues is introduced, the men will intervene to take over that practice. And so these are just some of the issues that we're going to be exploring. So our research design, we are exploring the idea that women's time poverty is an obstacle to women's participation in the peanut value chain and to their adoption of new technologies and techniques. One of the ways we're going to explore this is to measure women's and men's time use and expand the understanding of time poverty in relation particularly to the peanut production process. We are also going to inventory time-saving and time-enhancing technologies. Now, the COVID situation has introduced some challenges for doing this. We were hoping to do some focus groups this summer to evaluate the availability of technologies and to explore the possibility of whether women would be interested in adopting some of those technologies. I don't envision us being able to do that kind of research at this point. And the other thing is we were going to have gender integrated farmer field schools as the outreach mechanism, and this is where we would have introduced some of those technologies. Our plan is to do that in, oh, I see a question here, some of the technologies. One would be improved seed varieties. Seed varieties would be an example of a time-enhancing technology. This is something that people would, using the same amount of time, but become more productive. Labor-saving technologies would be an example would be something like a jab planter. So a jab planter is something, you know, in our experience in previous research projects in this area, usually there are 2 or 3 people planting. Someone pokes a hole in the ground and another person follows, you know, 2 people follow up behind with planting the seeds. A jab planter would mean just 1 person could do the work of those 3. So that's just some examples of the technologies we're exploring. But we were hoping we might find other examples by doing some of the focus groups. And I'm not sure how we're going to be doing that at this point. But we'll see. We might still be able to come up with some alternative strategies. And then, so yeah, the farmer field schools is where we would introduce some of these technologies, explore people's reactions to them, and then also actually ask, how would this fit into your routines? And we might actually get some feedback from women over whether or not they would adopt it, and then furthermore, why they might not adopt it and how it could potentially fit into their household routine. Then third, we would measure whether the interventions enhance women's capacity to participate in the peanut value chain and thereby improve household well-being. And then finally, to build capacity at SARI to continue to promote these kinds of new technologies. So our original research plan, which has been disrupted quite a bit, so we were hoping to do 3 waves of surveys in this first year. One was going to be during the just after the harvest season, which would have been last September, October. Then we were hoping to do an expanded survey here in January, February, which would have been during the dry season. And then we were going to do another survey after the planting season. And then we were going to do the intervention with the Farmer Field School. And then we were going to do the wave of surveys again to see if any of these technologies are adopted at the different stages, and furthermore, how that might have affected their practices. This has been altered for a number of reasons. One is probably the primary reason is that the funding just took forever to come through. I think a lot of the problem falls on Penn State. Penn State has become more and more difficult bureaucratically in dealing with some of these things. But that is, so we shifted. We were going to do the first harvest time survey now in next year. But we had really hoped to get the larger survey done back in January and February. However, it turns out that the funding was delayed, and then finally we got the funding and were able to get the funding to our collaborators in Ghana. But that wasn't until early May. At that point, the COVID pandemic had hit, and we were unable to do face-to-face surveys. So it's now June, and hopefully we just decided to make a shift, and we're going to do phone surveys, and those just started on Friday. And so I had hoped we would have some data to present today, but we've just got those started, and everything I'm hearing is that they're working well. So we're hoping that we will have some of these surveys to report the next time we meet. Next slide, please, Allison. So just a little information about our research team. I'm the PI here, and I've done work in northern Ghana with SARI related to rice production and sweet potato production in the past, and my Penn State colleagues have been involved in various other kind of gender projects in Honduras and Cambodia. And so we're going to be bringing some of those ideas of gender analysis and farmer field school interventions from those other projects to this team, to this project. And then I also want to highlight our Ghanaian team. And I will talk a little bit about the possible students who will be trained later. We've also run into some challenges there with getting students to Penn State, partly because of funding, partly because of testing issues. As many people know, most of the world doesn't do standardized testing quite like the United States, and so others don't do well on those standardized tests, and Penn State has very strict requirements for certain standardized testing. Okay, next slide, please. Just a very brief description of what we are hoping to achieve. Edward and I, our lead team member at the SARI, and I are overseeing the survey implementation. And Doris Richard will provide insights on the available technologies and the gender dynamics associated with them. For example, one of the things we've been challenged with is doing these surveys on time use with people who don't have watches or clocks available, which does create challenges. And Doris has been very helpful for helping us think through how we can ask the questions in a better way. We had hoped to be doing some ethnographic research this summer, but again, because of COVID, I don't think we're going to be able to do that. And also, our 2 students that we had targeted to be working on this project have not been able to come to Penn State. We're hoping now that we will be able to get her into a program in Ghana, and maybe in the future we'll still be able to get Mawuli here. We did, in the meantime, put a U.S. based student on the project, Caitlin Fisher, who's on this meeting with us today, will help us analyze some of the data that will be coming in over this summer. So we will have some students working on this project and hope to get the Ghanaian students involved at some point in the near future. And then a key component here is Janelle, Paige, and Life, as I mentioned earlier, are going to be leading this gender integrated farmer field schools. And I am still hoping, maybe, you know, the latest news I just saw in the New York Times today that a vaccine could be available as early as November or December of this year. If that's the case, maybe we'll be able to travel to Ghana in January or February. Next slide, please. So in the meantime, as we've been waiting for funding, we've been working very hard on designing the surveys. We have successfully sent the money to SARI, finally got that transferred in early May. And as I indicated earlier, Caitlin Fisher has been brought on as a graduate student. The challenges we're facing include the funding delays. These have really hurt us, and I'm not sure what to do about that. And then the other thing is Penn State's unwillingness to admit Canadian students with test scores that are lower than expectations. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the time use surveys. So there have been a lot of there's been a lot of research on time use surveys since it first kind of came into existence. I think it was 1977 was when some of the first studies began to be done on time use and how to measure them. And there was a recent study by Leland Glenna, who pointed at 5 challenges with the way these surveys are being done. The first was that what they called granularity, and that is that these surveys do not get enough detail about how people are doing the work of their daily lives. A second is simultaneity, which I mentioned earlier. This is when, you know, women may be caring for children while also cooking and doing field work. And so how do we measure that in these surveys? How do we capture that they're doing multiple tasks at the same time? And failing to capture that could be misleading. Another is seasonality. How does time use vary by different seasons? Often a time use survey is a one-shot deal. Then the other is sampling frame. Do you capture the work of everyone in the household? Because perhaps all household members are doing work. And then third is a question of richer coding. So how do we interpret the responses? And one of the things that I've thought about a lot with some of the richer coding issues is some of the work is more intensive than other work. You know, you see some people carrying 50 pounds of wood on their head, big tubs of water on their head. Or you see some of the young men tilling in the field with these hand hoes. The intensity is more than, say, just making a rope out of tree bark while sitting in the front yard. These are issues of intensity that we don't always capture in these kinds of surveys. So next slide. Some of the ways we're hoping to get at these questions. So we really address 4 of them. The granularity issue we're not getting at, but I think some of that is often overstated anyway, but we can talk about that later if anyone wants to. But the issue of simultaneity and richer coding, we're going to be able to get at these in our survey because we're shooting for intensive quantitative data in a small number of households. So we're not doing a large sample. how do we deal with the possible difference understanding of the question by person being asked? That's always a challenge. We can talk about that later, Helga. Simultaneity and Richard. So the issue is we're not going to do, say, 500 household surveys. We're going to do 25 households, and we're going to do it very intensively. And we're going to do 3 waves that will address the seasonality issue. So we're going to try to address 3 different seasons of growing. We're also striving to capture simultaneity and local complexity through the qualitative field work. So by having people participating in the community and observing what is going on, they'll be able to capture perhaps some of the simultaneity. The other is sampling frame. One of the concerns, as I pointed out earlier, is that not every household member who works is being surveyed. We are going to be surveying multiple members of the household, including multiple wives. And many of the, I think we got a count, I don't remember now, of our sample have multiple wives. Usually, many of them have 2 wives, and I don't think we have any that with more than 2 wives. But the issue is polygamy, of understanding how the responsibilities might be divided between multiple members of the household. So I think we're getting at some of those concerns being raised by previous studies. All right, next slide, please. So this is our new slide. Things have been shifted around a little bit. Our first survey is going to be, is going on right now. So we are about 5 months late, but we are getting it done now, and that's a very good thing. We will follow up with the first planting time survey, hopefully later in June or early July. So I think we'll be able to get back on track here using phone surveys instead of face-to-face surveys. Maybe next year we'll be able to convert to some of the face-to-face surveys. And as I indicated earlier, still not sure if we're going to be able to do the farmer field school, at least not the way we envisioned at first. We'll see. Next slide, please. So next steps, we still hope to complete the 3 waves of the surveys this year. We still hope to do some manner of assessment of which technologies might be most appropriate, even though we're not sure we're going to be able to do that through focus groups. And we're hoping that Frida will be able to start a PhD program at the University of Uganda that we will support, and that she will then be able to become more involved. Next slide, please. So needs to we need to reconsider what can be achieved. Perhaps we won't be able to do the farmer field schools and so forth. We might need to rethink the graduate student education goal. We may end up, ironically, educating more students than we originally planned. Penn State's costs for graduate education are higher than University of Ghana, so maybe we'll be able to educate more people. We'll see. So these are just some of the challenges that we're facing. Next slide, please. All right. So I saw a number of chat questions pop up. Jessica, I don't know if I have time to answer those. You can tell me.
Yeah, maybe you could just take 1 or 2 of them.
Okay. Anything about how the phone surveys are going? What I'm hearing is that they're working just fine. The extended survey, we had used a previous survey that we used for sweet potato production, and that took 3 hours when we did it several years ago. And we whittled that down to just, we're hearing now that it just takes 55 minutes to do it by phone. So we're happy with that. But everything we're hearing is that it's working. If you want, there was that Michigan State University had a webinar this past week on using phones to do surveys. And fortunately, we don't have some of the challenges that they have. like, does everyone have phones? Because we have a small sample, we actually went out and bought some phones and delivered them to the community so that we would be sure that everyone we wanted to survey would have a phone. So there are some little things that we were able to do that, yeah. Okay, having started, do you expect to continue using that approach for the rest of the survey rounds? Good question, Jessica. I'm not sure. We can think that through, perhaps methodologically for consistency purposes, we might want to. But yeah, we can think that through. Are the farmer field school members identified? No, not yet. We were hoping to do that here as part of these focus groups and qualitative interventions. But we have not yet done that.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Leland. I think Cynthia had another question, and maybe Helga did as well, but we could discuss those in chat perhaps. I think that it's, yeah, I mean, of course, as soon as COVID hit, I think many of our survey-based teams started to think about the potential for using phones. And so, you know, that's something I'd like to follow up on a bit more with you, and maybe some of the other groups will as well. Okay, so our next presenter is J.S. Wang at UGA, who will be talking about their gut microbiome study in Uganda. So back to our nutrition area.
Okay, I guess good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. I don't know where it is to everyone. Okay, I briefly introduce our project. The title is Regulation of Gut Microbiome and the Microbial Metabolome by Peanut Consumption in Uganda Children. Next slide, please. For this project, we have built up an investigators team, including Dr. Lily Tang at the UGA, works collaborating with the Peanut CRISP and the USAID Peanut Innovation Lab in the last like 15 years. Also, the Makerere University School of Public Health, those specifically like John Sepio, then Dr. Mena and Jeffrey. We worked, I guess, almost 9 years or 10 years, starting with the like how the aflatoxin influences those work, and later on those NIH, the center, the harbor planning grant. So the team also including like Cassie Xu is a postdoc associate and a lab manager at the UGA, and the other like the project administrator research associate James and Irene, including those lab technicians, student assistants, specifically since this project involved the schools, so we including school nurses for that. So next slide, please. Next. So why we focus on microbiome? You see the microbiome, so microbial influence of human health has been identified for 1,000 years, but only in the last 20 years or less than 20 years, the microbiome get a much more interesting, mainly because those are the advanced technology available, specifically the genomics, the metabolomics, proteomics, those techniques available. So by definition here, that's the general microbiome is a collection of all genomes of microorganisms that's in a specific environmental niche. So now agriculture settings, people can looking for specific like grains or the crops, what their like a microbiome is. Like we maybe peanut, they have specifically like the microbiome in their growth or those the environment. The next slide. We are more, since we are in School of Public Health, we more interested in those gut microbiome. mainly you see the gut from what the food you enter through those esophagus to stomach, finally go to like rectums. The physiologically changed a lot. So the pH you see, obviously from stomach it's lower, then go to the mutual, like those in the feces, maybe a little bit like over 7.4. So because of that, there are different microbiomes growing or harvest in the gut. So that's why this picture shows like what those major, the microbes, they grow in those each section of like the stomach, the small intestine or large intestine for that. Next slide, please. So the research in last 15 years, we know in gut, they have about 38 trillion microbes. They have 500,000 species. So weight mainly like from the food or then to the 3 to 5 pounds. Their genome might be 50 to 100-fold than the human genome for that. Also, the study been shown there's a dominant microbes in the gut. So it's a difference more specifically for that. Next slide. So there's a lot of works been in last like 10 or 15 years, try to understand what's the function on those gut microbiota or gut microbiome on human health. So what this slide show a lot of functions, from immune function, from growth, developmental, neurological, almost everything now they believe are influenced by the gut microbiota for that. Well, next slide. So there's many factors affecting gut microbiome. Specifically, you see, certainly we all know genetics, different people, you could have those different genetic genotypes. Then, but since the fetus on the development, their birth load, also the C-sections and the natural delivery, they are totally different. Like in the babies, they have different like gut microbiome for that. Different places, they influence that, different hygienic like patterns, or later on, you really environmental exposures, or what the drug or intake, all those, they all influence all of those. So traditionally, you can get the curve for the health after birth to the elderly. So before like 10 years old, it's the big changes for that. So that's why means, hey, the children or early childhood might much more susceptible for the factors, environmental factors, to affecting their health. So next slide, please. So that's why like in gestation, mainly prenatal factors, then in those after born, the neonatal factors, then those after those infancy and the early childhood, there are postnatal factors. So we can find those feeding, food, those play a very important roles for the microbiota modulation. Next slide, please. So that's why our rationales for the study is that peanuts are very good plant source of nutrients. You see they are rich in proteins, fats, vitamins, and minerals. So that's why it's good, already been used for many, like using peanut for the supplement or intervention for malnutrition and other non-communicable diseases that We understand the gut microbiota profiles can be altered by host health and environmental input, dietary preference, medical treatment, or lifestyle-related factors. So also, there's many studies show the changes in the gut microbiome strongly associated with malnutrition, healthy growth, immune response among children. Specifically, in children, a positive shift in gut microbiome and the gut microbiota-dependent metabolism can enhance the general health, specifically for the development. So that's very important. So on the other hand, the unsolved question is, what's the mechanism for peanuts or peanut-based meals will affect the health through regulating gut microbiota. So that's the rationale. Next slide, please, for our proposed study. So our hypothesis, next, for add one more, please. So, yeah. So in last 15 years, no, that is, yeah, keep this one. Last 15 years, no, previous. Okay. Previous 15 years, my lab focused on how those food constituents or prebiotics, specifically also food contaminants like aflatoxins and those toxins, they can influence the gut microbiome further to influence nutrition in the health. That's what in lab, I have 4 PhD students being graduated. We published 12 or 15 papers on that. So for this project, we extended it for peanut supplement or let those children to consume project. It's more then use the tools to check compositional changes, functional changes, or phenotypic like metabolomic changes, how that will affect the children. Next slide. Yeah, so our working hypothesis is long-term peanut consumption can improve general health, growth, and development in children. So mainly through those regulating or modulating the changes in host gut microbial compositions or their dependent metabolisms. I will answer those questions in the end of that. So I saw some questions come out. Okay. So our study goals, there's twofold. One is long-term goal. This project is to study specific rules of maybe salted or roasted peanuts improving nutrition health status in growing children with both genders. The immediate goals, this project is will investigate effect peanut on regulation of gut microbiome and the microbial metabolism in primary school children in the Uganda, then later on we found it in Mukono district. Next slide, please. So the study approach will use the next generation sequencing and the high throughput analytical techniques to perform metagenomics and metabolomics analysis to based on our previously study. We'll use those techniques in UGA or available. It's ready to move forward. So next slide. The study plan and objective is to will consent the parents, try to recruit 96 youth at age 6 to 9 with both half male, half females in 2 primary schools with similar environmental or socioeconomic conditions. Those were divided into 2 groups according to scores, 24 for each group, each schools, then plus together is 48. So we'll measure earlier Mark mentioned those anthropometric growth parameters also collect those sample of feces, urine, both for the baseline and for the study. Then we'll conduct a 90-day supplement study with salt peanuts, mainly sort of like snacks, peanut snacks, the 1 ounce for 2 times per day. So to give about a 90-day study. Then during the study, we'll collect the samples. Next slide, please. So the flow chart is that the study design will follow up those baseline cross-sectional study followed by randomized intervention experimental study. So that's the generally the flow chart on that, then collect those parameters, growth parameters every 2 weeks, then collect the samples in every 30 days for that. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is more like the subjects sampling and do the analysis. This is just show those how we're doing that for this kind of. Okay, next slide. So we will taking those samples to extract the fecal DNA, ship to UGA laboratory to perform the microbiome analysis. Then we also extract all those the fecal samples. We perform targeted, non-targeted metabolomic analysis. Those methods already developed and published in our lab. Then further using bioinformatics in a statistical analysis to see how they are correlated with nutritional status, growth parameters, and others for that. So next slide. Okay, I saw those questions. Okay, I will answer to the end. Okay, let me just, there's 3 parameters we'll specifically monitor that the compositions of microbiome. We'll see, hey, before the study, after study, or how the baseline, there's any compositional changes for that, because we found that earlier aflatoxin exposure, they can change those compositions in the gut. So then we'll check those functions of microbiome. So that's why we'll see what specifically those regulating pathways or molecular mapping, they can change that. Then we'll see the dynamics of microbiome metabolome to see how that changes for that. Next slide. So this is a method we published to use the 16S RNA gene surveys. That's more focused on the 2 to 4 regions. That's earlier work for that. Next slide. Then later on we did the metagenomics analysis now with the UGA. That's the genomic facilities available. We can confirm the total gene content those quite easier for that. So we can perform the metagenomic analysis. Next slide. The metabolomic approaches that we use those both ALC, the UHPLC based, and those ALC-AMS or GCMS based analysis. We're getting those chromatogram out based on the study design, then do a series those analysis for specifically the bioinformatic analysis. There's parameters in the right, principal component analysis, those projection to latent structures, supporter vector machines, and the linear discriminant analysis, and random forest, all those those now it's available. Also, previously in our publication, we did that. Next slide, please. So our expected outcome to find specific rules of peanut supplement or consumption, improving nutrition and health status in growing children. to fill the knowledge gap in research field of nutrition, diet, health, and microbiome in children with specific focus in peanut. Then we are to establish the databases on metagenomics and metabolomics for checking those peanut consumption for the regulation of those gut microbiome. Next. The timeline for our activities. The first year we took, with the help of Makera, specifically Jones Samuel, we established a study team in the base of Makera University School of Public Health. We already performed those trainings, also developing study protocols, methods, sampling, strategies. We also check in different places to select the studies school sites, which also get the institutional review board approval for the study. Then also we communicated with each of those school, the leaders and the nurseries, try to set up all those measurement in the local. So next. So our second year originally is try to, we get the approval for that. We get the approval for the IRB in Makera University. We also get the approval from the Uganda government for ethical for those. We plan to study, the recruiter study participants get a consent, all those, everything we try to initiate in May this year. But unfortunately, next slide. So this is a updated for that. We get those approval for that. We get also our group in Uganda attended the gender workshops in March 2020. So everything we set up. We also in the management entity with Dave and with Jamie, we really contacted many those manufacturers, try to work out to order the peanuts to ship to the study site. Next slide. But unfortunately, the COVID pandemic led to a national lockdown. All schools were closed indefinitely in Uganda. The same thing, I think, like the US everywhere for that. So the national transport restrictions and social distancing has restricted movement to different study sites. All those COVID-19 certainly delayed all our work. So everything, it's really in last 3 months been held there, they're not to have too much, except those communications among investigators. So next slide. So now you see with every places, there's a resumption plans there. So like in UGA, our side will start from June 16 back to normal research operation with cautions. So once the school system in Uganda reopening confirmed, then we were immediately to working out with the collaborators. First, we'll try to get in those redesign for this timeline. Then we'll study to get that. Once those study been done, then the data or sample analysis certainly will be come back to UGA. We expect maybe first quarter in 2021. That's what we'll have for next slide. Well, this is all those people, we try to thanks for those people for that. This is end of my slide. Well, I would like to answer questions for that. Let me see, where's my...
Yeah, and I think what I'll suggest is we're a few minutes into our break time now. So JS, why don't you, feel free to answer those questions now. And for those people who want to take a step away from their computer.
Can you, because I can't find my chat.
Oh, yeah. So, yes. So let me just say that for those of you who would like to step away, why don't you come back at 11:55, and we'll have Carrie's presentation.
I'm in the iPad. I didn't find my chat.
Let's see. Somebody, Helga has a question. Is there any evidence that a healthy gut microbiome affects the brain development and cognition in children?
100%. That's already there's a report there. So that's why I'm reading for the the methods for that. So we two projects certainly can have some collaborations on that. I'm so surprised that they said previously they said 7 weeks intervention. They find that there's changes of that. That's surprising me because that's so significant for that. Maybe those people for malnutrited kids, they after the improvement of 7 weeks they did for that. But traditionally, from the gut microbiome, the people we did the studies in women like 60 years old, or those with other those green tea extracts, we find that 30 days really not significant, but the 90 days or longer, they find that there's significant difference for that. Maybe for young children, the cognition is much more sensitive. The other things, I think that after the 3 months, the growth parameters will be significant if you use peanut for it. Other questions?
Yes. Dr. Luasa was wondering why you selected Mukono. He noted that it's not amongst the worst off nutritionally in the country.
Well, you have to control you want to do the studies. This is kind of, we call it the intervention or the supplement study. You want to more control. The feeding study previously can target a wide whole schools for 1,000 people, but it's kind of loose and kids take food away out of that. You want to see scientifically more changes that you want to be more controlled. So that's why we even try to see the boarding students in those schools for that to do that. So that's understandable. You want to get a more controlled studies. You don't want to get it uncontrolled because if those kids taking those peanuts away or back home don't eat, then your results may be totally changed. We want them to see them to eat that. We distribute that much. We collect the samples much more restricted, like control environment.
Great. Okay. Thank you, JS. Let's go on to the break now and come back in 10 minutes. There are still some questions there in the chat, JS. Cynthia noted that on an iPad, you can find them under more on the upper right corner of your iPad. But we're also going to be sending all these questions to PIs later.
Okay, thanks. I will check. Okay, chat is 15. Would the results different? Well, they might be different from peanut butter because peanut butter it's different from those like peanut alone, I guess. Certainly, I don't know that because a food scientist or food engineer can tell the peanut butter have different, how they prepared for that. Peanut butter of status quo diet, what size increase in peanut consumption? Well, we provided like 2 ounces, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon for that. So the control kids get a similar increase in calories from non-peanut source. Yeah, there's 2 ways we think about that. That's why since this is a 90-day study, we try to compensate those kids like in control group for the same like those peanuts after the study period for that. For the calories, that's, well, that's, we're checking for that, for those studies for that. I think we will do a dietary survey to see for that. Certainly your question is correct, because those growth parameters might be influenced by the calories for that.
Okay, everyone, it's 11:55, so I apologize for the relatively short break today, but I think we should move on to the last few of our presentations. The next one is going to be presented by Carrie Stephens. We're going to stay in Uganda and with young people, but we're going to be looking at a very different, I think, set of questions and methodologies. So over to you in a second, Carrie.
Need to unmute. Okay. Let's see. Well, welcome everyone to our presentation. I think some of the team is on here today, if not all of them. My name is Carrie Stephens and I'm at the University of Tennessee. And the update that I'm going to provide today is about our Photovoice project for youth empowerment in Uganda. Next slide, please. So the idea about Photovoice, just to give a little bit of an overview before I say our hypothesis, is a methodology to give voice to underrepresented. One of those underrepresented youth or groups can be youth. And so we wanted to really give the voice to youth in Uganda by using Photovoice. So our hypothesis is was using Photovoice as a methodology will result in improved youth empowerment in Uganda peanut value chain. So we set out 3 specific objectives. One was to assess rural youth empowerment in peanut value chains. The second objective was utilize participatory mapping, and I'll explain that in a minute, and Photovoice methods to document youth empowerment. And then to publish findings through community sharing festivals, public displays, workshops in Uganda and the United States, and outreach and education events at secondary schools. Next slide, please. So this is our team. We have 3 groups involved in. First is the University of Tennessee, which is the PIs listed there is Dave Ader, Tom Gill, myself, Jennifer Richards, and then our graduate student, Anna Chandler, and I have to give her a shout out. She put these slides together, so thank you very much. Makerere University, we have Prof. Stephen, Prof. Kaya, Prof. May, and then 2 graduate students there, Daisy and Ruth. Or Martha, and then narrow with Dr. David Okello. Next slide, please. So the idea of Photovoice, like I said at the beginning, it's a qualitative research process that gives communities or underrepresented groups the tool of photography that can help elicit responses about a certain topic or issue. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to empower youth by using photos to give them a voice in how they view the peanut value chain. Because a lot of times these underrepresented groups, they don't always want to speak out or give their voice. So photography is a good way to do that. So what was the idea of our project? So we met and we decided that we wanted to do a full year of 2 different districts with youth using Photovoice to elicit their stories about the peanut value chain. So first we decided we had to conduct Photovoice training, and that would be conducted with the youth, and I'll explain that on the next slide. We wanted to then take photos, have them take photos over the course of 2 peanut seasons. Then the graduate students would be collecting those photos on a monthly basis and helping the youth go through those photos to identify the ones that help best represent their perspective on the peanut value chain during that month. Then they would then select those photos for reflection and dialogue. And then that would facilitate group discussions, and then we would document the youth stories through that. Next slide, please. So when you're looking at photos, one of the things we want to think about from a qualitative perspective is, how does that photo tell your story, or how can you construct the narrative of utilizing that photo? So some of the questions that individuals need to ask themselves are, what do we see here? Because a photo can represent a different message to so many individuals, but for that individual, what do we see here? What is really happening? How does this relate to our lives? Why does this situation, concern, or strength exist? And what can we do about it? So these are the questions that we would be helping narrate with the youth to help us understand their series of photos. Next slide, please. So what we did is we selected, Dr. Okello was very instrumental in this, and also the faculty at Manary University, in selecting 2 districts that we would look at in terms of utilizing Photovoice. So the districts were Noya and Tororo, and those were selected because obviously very different parts of Uganda, but with also different agricultural outlines as well. So we wanted to also, when we look at Photovoice, we wanted to decide, how can we compare Photovoice to what we called like a controlled methodology. So we selected 30 youth from both districts, and we stuck with the ages of 20 to 29. And so all 30, so 30 in Noya, 30 in Tororo, all 30 in Noya and all 30 in Tororo would be trained in a methodology called participatory mapping. And participatory mapping is where they just map their community in terms of the peanut value chain, how they perceive their community reflected that, or their district. Then what we would do is, Then what we do is we select 15 of those youth who would also be trained in Photovoice and would complete the Photovoice project. And then at the end, we would compare those 2 methodologies as well. So we did the same in Tororo as well. Next slide, please. So that leads us to kind of a little bit of overview of our project. So to give you some accomplishments to date, there was a team of University of Tennessee folks that went to Manary University and met with the faculty and graduate students there, and Dr. Okello was there as well. And we actually did a training kind of as a pilot run to what we would be giving youth in the districts. So in order to do that, what we decided is that we wanted to recruit 3 graduate students to be part of this project. And so far we've done that. Anna Chandler, who is graduate student at University of Tennessee, and then 2 graduate students at Manary University who would be participating in this project. We launched the project, and then what we did is, after we did the kind of like the pilot run training on Photovoice at Manary University, we made an on-site visit to both Tororo and Noya districts to meet with a select group of youth. And what we did there is we did a mini training with them on Photovoice to kind of gauge their buy-in per se to participate in the project. And so we did that in both districts. And then we had this discussion of project objectives and Photovoice with the youth. And then after we met with the youth, they were very excited to be engaged possibly in this project. A couple of the individuals in each district created a WhatsApp group, and we still keep in touch with those youth today in each district. The other thing, so after we came back, we laid out a plan to start our project in January 2020. So like some of the other groups, there was some delay in funding, so that pushed back our start date to, which would have been March 2020. And then of course, COVID-19 happened and the travel, bands and things of that nature. But what we did do is we did secure funds to purchase the smartphones, and we got some tablets. So when we can start this project officially, we at least have the phones and we're ready to go. And then of course, working on objective 3, which was going to be the community fairs and the photo sharing and all that, has not happened yet because we have not been able to get out into the districts to officially complete all the training and start our interviews with the youth. Next slide, please. So Manary University initiatives, I wanted to put this in here because the 2 graduate students there are, one is in agriculture and applied economics. So her topic is investigating the drivers and barriers of youth participation in groundnut value chains in Toranoia. And then Ruth is in food science and technology, and she's using Photovoice to enhance the quality and safety of peanuts along the value chain. And then at the University of Tennessee, I don't have the slide in here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Anna Chandler's accomplishments this far. She has developed training guides for all the groups in the area of Photovoice and all of the methodology pieces and all the step-by-step process that's going to go into completing the project. And she's been working on her literature review on youth empowerment and Photovoice, and our potential is going to be writing a paper and working on a project in that area in terms of unique methodologies, in terms of looking at empowerment. Next slide, please. So the timeline for next steps is making another trip back to Uganda to reconnect, hopefully in later fall 2020, but hopefully January 2021, we want to start the project just like we would have in 2020. We're going to do pre and post interviews with the youth participants related to their knowledge of the peanut value chain, their perspectives on how they fit within the community, and also just overall in terms of Photovoice and participatory mapping. Then we're going to complete the participatory mapping activity in both districts. We're going to do the Photovoice training in both districts, and then hopefully launching our photo taking experience in February 2021. And then throughout 2021, do regular check-ins with participants. We had graduate students who would be out in the field, also working with the participants on collecting the photos, helping write the narratives, and then keeping track of the photos we're going to use at the very end. Then in February 2022, photo taking ends. We'll do post interviews, complete photo selection, photo collection, and then our focus group discussions. Next slide, please. And then spring to summer 2022, this is the end of project workshops. We are going to take those, I think it's 5 to 10 photos, what we decided on, to do community sharing about their perspective on the peanut value chain, and collect their narratives, do the photo displays. We're going to do some digital media outreach, regional workshops on youth engagement in the peanut value chain, and then also some workshops in the United States related to youth empowerment using Photovoice. And that's it.
Great, thank you so much, Carrie. There was one question in the chat, which we have a couple minutes if you'd like to respond to it. Isaac's question, Anna also responded in the chat, but this is around the issue of empowerment, what it means to, there's a lot of debate around whether or not people can be empowered, or whether empowerment is something that they, sort of generate from within, that there are enabling conditions perhaps that help people to become empowered. But yeah, it's a bit of a fraught term. So maybe you could speak to that a bit.
So, okay, ALEC is in the control group be monitored so as not to consume peanuts, considering that they usually have access to peanut street vendors. I don't.
That's the question just before that. Isaac asked about unpacking youth empowerment, what that means exactly, what are the descriptors?
So when you look at empowerment in the literature, it comes from within. However, marginalized groups or underrepresented groups or groups that don't feel like they can speak out in authority situations tend to not voice their opinions or tend not to have an opinion at all. So having the photos, anonymous photos really, to show them that this is how we perceive the peanut value chain, this is how we want to move forward with peanut production, gives a voice to them, so that way that hopefully the community can look at that. And the whole idea is that they're losing a lot of youth from, you know, peanut production. They're trying to go find other jobs because they don't feel like they have a voice in the process. So this just gives them a voice so that the community can see that this is how they perceive the peanut value chain and what we can do to take from the youth. If that helps or makes sense.
Yes, I think it does. Thank you. I think let's move on to our next presentation then, unless there are any other questions. If you have questions for Carrie, then you know, feel free to send them to her by email or in the chat box. Our next presentation is a project from UC Santa Barbara in conjunction with colleagues at Senegalese in Senegal. And I'll hand it over. I think it's Sophia who's presenting today.
And I'm going to introduce it quickly. All right. So thank you, Jessica, and thank you to the Peanut Lab. It's great to kind of have these opportunities to the community to come together and see a bunch of high-functioning individuals getting along. As Jessica mentioned, this project is focused on women's time poverty generally, and how that creates resilience within peanut production. We can advance to the next slide. Great. And so I just wanted to quickly introduce the project team before turning it over to one of the graduate students on the project, Sophia. So we have Samba, Mamadou, Kodu, and Maimouna as the Senegal team. Jackie's at University of Minnesota. Sari Blakely, who's a postdoc on the project. Sophia, who's a graduate student on the project at UCSB, me. And then I've got two new pictures on here that weren't in the last time I presented. Sarah Schlund is an undergraduate at UCSB, joint major degree in statistics and geography. And she's been helping a lot since the beginning of the project on the pilot study at UCSB. And then we were fortunate to have recently hired Kathy Bayless. She's an agricultural economist who had been at University of Illinois. And we've just hired her into the department. She has a huge amount of experience doing livelihood work and work on women in Africa and agriculture. And so she's going to be joining as a co-PI on the project. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Sophia now.
Great, thanks, Stuart. So first, thank you, Jessica, very much for giving us some great project context in the beginning. And then I also want to thanks Leland for really introducing a lot of the key concepts that we've been thinking about in the context of our own project. And then I just want to make a really quick disclaimer. We sort of put these slides together. They're intended to be a kind of reference. So I'm not gonna, they're gonna be more detailed than what I'm gonna actually say as we talk through, but hopefully I invite you to sort of go back and look at them at a later date. All right, so project context. So we are in the gender and youth, and our kind of thought on that is we know that there's uneven definitions of work across genders. So different folks in households are responsible for domestic care, childcare, peanut production. And then within that sort of women's experience, so as Leland had suggested, I'm gonna turn on my video for a minute, okay. So as Leland had suggested, women may experience sort of more time poverty because of these additional responsibilities. So again, things like childcare. And our thought is this may actually impact peanut production. So let's then go and explore some time use among this population. And specifically, thank you, we're interested in sort of seasonality and climate shocks and birth and infant care and the effects that has on time use and the sort of downstream effects that that has on peanut production and the peanut value chain. Great. So these are great questions to ask, but like Leland noted, we haven't really developed the sort of methods to do this. So the traditional methods for studying time use in populations involve surveys, involve sort of written time diaries, and these can be very challenging to implement in sort of lower resource settings. So our central technological innovation was to sort of modify two wearable devices, a watch, which is pictured here in the lower panel, and then a voice recorder on the left. And these are sort of wrist worn. And the idea is that they will capture both actual real-time activity. So the watches are all equipped with alarms that go off and they prompt folks to make a an audio recording. And then also record heart rate, which would be a measure of effort or that idea of intensity that Leland talked about. So I think we can advance. So given that, given this sort of new technology, we would like to, again, sort of understand the impacts of climate shocks and new births on women's participation in peanut farming and general time use. That's one of our big aims. And alongside that, we'd like to develop an innovative method for collecting time use and work intensity data collection in a subliterate context. So again, that gets at our sort of central technological innovation. So, oh, sorry, can you go back just a second? So to do these sort of three, or to accomplish these two specific aims, we've got sort of four pieces that feed into that. So we're going to conduct, or we have conducted, an ethnographic assessment to gain a qualitative understanding of central constructs necessary to design the survey and inform next steps in Calax, Senegal, which is the region that we're working in. Secondly, we're going to pilot our new time use technologies with local California populations. Third, we're going to collect baseline and follow-up data on household demographics, time use, empowerment, perceptions of past climate events, and peanut engagement. And I would just draw your attention to sort of this ethnographic assessment is meant to feed into this third aim here. And then fourth, collect high-frequency time use and work effort data among household members and across households. And so that secondary pilot is the sort of precursor work to that fourth aim. Okay, now you can advance, thanks. So progress to date. So first shout out to all of our field teams. So Jacqueline, Jessica, Maimuna, and Kodu, who went into the field in February and early March, or I guess from February to early March. So right before COVID, thank you very much for going out, and conducted an ethnographic assessment. And so the ethnographic assessment had a few different goals. First, to understand gendered work division and simultaneity in day-to-day activities. So again, this is something that Leland talked about, work that's getting done at the same time. So for instance, shelling and watching children. Secondly, to understand structure of households, power decision-making, and compositional changes in households. So how do household sizes and composition fluctuate seasonally? Third, to understand childcare practices and implications for peanut farming. So again, getting back at that first aim. And lastly, to sort of pilot the wrist-worn technology. Thanks. And so before I kind of deep dive into the findings from this, I would just remind everyone that this type of qualitative research is smaller in scale in the sense that we're talking to less people. However, the data that we collect is quite in depth, right? So we're talking about data from interviews, both formal and informal, sort of focus groups, also formal and informal, participant observation, tours. It's an immense amount of work and collects some very, very deep sort of in-depth data, which is really useful for getting us able to design a baseline survey and follow-up surveys that actually speak to issues. So we're using this sort of as a way to test our paradigm, but also as a way to generate hypotheses that we can then test in our baseline findings. So I should also say that this is one of those slides where there's a lot more research and a lot more detail than I'm actually going to present on, but I would first sort of draw your attention to this lovely yellow circle, which has kind of our main findings, right? That household structure and composition mediates individual time use and time poverty. So just going to say that again, because we think it's really important. Household structure and composition mediates individual time use and time poverty. So what does that, oh, we can go back just 1 second, sorry. So what does that mean? So that means that labor allocation is based on gender, age, and position in the household, right? So households with different types of members have different divisions of labor, at least from our findings from this study. So for instance, daughter-in-laws are often responsible for domestic work, but if there's more than one wife in a household, they might trade off responsibilities in some sort of fashion. Similarly, if there's a mother-in-law who's present in a household, that person might contribute to childcare. And then we also did see evidence of seasonality of work and environmental stressors. And now we can advance. Thank you. So the other prong that I was going to talk about today, so the ethnographic assessment and the pilot study, is this sort of wrist-worn heart and activity monitoring study that we're conducting here at UC Santa Barbara. So the big objective for this study is basically to test the technology, right? So does this watch and recorder combo, can we actually get that to work in a sort of high resource environment before we send it into a low resource environment? So we put together a study called the WAM study for short, where we enrolled graduate students in shared households, so graduate students from the same households. And we consented them for a 2 weeks period to wear watches and recorders continuously. And then every day they would make 3 recordings at a preset sort of alarm time. And those recordings are WWCA. So the W's stand for where have you been and what have you been up to since the last alarm. The C there is the sort of context. So what is your current context? Who are you with? And the A is the activity. So what's your current activity? And then alongside this, we also asked graduate students to keep a traditional time diary. So those are written and complete a few different surveys, demographic surveys, and also a sort of cooperative household survey. So this is actually generating a fair amount of data for us to sort of test the efficacy of the watches, the wrist-worn technology. So you can advance, thanks. So progress to date, what have we seen so far? Well, we were able to successfully enroll about 5 people before COVID-19 really started affecting research operations at the university. So we have 5 people who completed the study to date. However, we have a lot of data from them. So we have pretty extensive data on activities from those time use journals. We have demographic data, we have stress data, and then we also have over 1 hour and 40 minutes of descriptive audio. Some more descriptive perhaps than others, but a good example here, quote in the middle from one of our participants. Yeah, I spent most of the day here, included cleaning my room, taking a nap, cooking, and doing homework. Grad student life is a blast. So we have a lot of data in that form as well as in this sort of written journal form. And then this plot on the right is the heart rate data from just sort of a 3-day period. So you can see there that black line is a sort of continuous heart rate measure from the watches. And the red there just on the bottom is actually the times that we collected recordings from this participant over that period. So things to note is we do see some peaks and some troughs. And for this participant, the peaks correspond to elevated physical activity, so being at the gym, and the troughs correspond roughly to sleeping periods. So we do see some signal here. It is messy, and we're still working on parsing this out, but we're pretty excited about it. I think we can advance. So plans for the future. So prior to COVID and just sort of what we can still accomplish, I suppose, we're going to continue to analyze the sort of ethnographic assessment data in more detail. Oh, I forgot to mention a very important point. Pardon. So We also deployed the watches in Senegal during this ethnographic assessment. So I showed you the black watches prior, but if you don't mind scrolling all the way back up to that picture for the ethnographic study. Yes, advance 2 slides. One more, yeah. So you can see here these lovely models are wearing the blue version. So on their right hands here, they've got the blue version of these watches on. So in terms of continued analysis for the ethnographic assessment, and we could go all the way back to the end now. Thank you. Yes, in terms of the continued analysis for the ethnographic assessment data, so assessing the technological kind of accuracy of those watches, we do know that the type of technology in those watches to collect heart rate is it's called PPP, so it's photoplethysmography. So it's light dependent, and we know that that has is affected by highly pigmented or darker skin tone. So we're still working through to see if we can get a good signal from that data. And then of course, we're continuing to analyze the sort of ethnographic results. So using that to develop this sort of baseline survey per our aims, as well as develop a narrative for publication about household structure and work accomplishment within this population. And then for the WAM pilot, we will continue to analyze that data as well, and we're going to begin validating the written versus the recorded time use, see if we get similar activities that are being recorded, see if we get any more or less evidence of simultaneity in one sort of method or the other. And then we'll validate the sort of watch heart rate against sort of heart strap measurements that I didn't mention, but we also we used a heart strap to collect sort of more precise measurements of heart rate. And then finally, I guess, developing narratives for publication based on that data as well. So you can advance, thanks. So in light of COVID-19, obviously there's been a delay in international travel, and for us, what does that mean? Well, we're exploring options for sort of in-country travel for the Senegalese team to engage with rural regions and thinking about how do we get our equipment out there. And we're also watching the sort of border openings to try and bring our Senegalese graduate students to the US for an extended research period, which was supposed to happen this spring, and obviously has been delayed. And then for the sort of WAM pilot, one of the things that we're kind of excited about is we think we have a pretty extraordinary opportunity to look for these sort of same gender divisions and time poverty with a expanded enrollment. So instead of focusing on just graduate students, we'd also like to enroll undergraduates still located on campus and staff and faculty with school-aged children at home to sort of understand, again, gender divisions, time poverty, as well as sort of adding a COVID contact survey module to sort of understand health behaviors outside the home. So we've submitted approval for this expansion to our local reviewing body, and we're anxiously waiting to hear back. And I think, yes, so a big shout out again to our lovely field team here, Jessica and Jackie and Maimuna and Kodu, and then also have to shout out to our graduates, to our undergraduate student, Sarah, as well, and the entire team. Thanks. That's it. Yeah, you can go back.
Great, thank you so much, Sophia, and the rest of the team. I know we're all very excited to find out the results of the project, and of course, this technology in particular. I think there were a couple of questions in the chat box, but those have been answered by other members of the team. So I think just in the interest of time, let's move on to
Yes,
Broadmill's project. But yes, go ahead, Stuart.
Can I say real quickly, one other thing is we were right up to the point of having Maimuna and Kodu come work at UCSD. Because that was the COVID-19, I mean, for all the other unfortunate aspects of it, it also completely hit us. And we had housing and the visas in place, and those were, we didn't even manage to get them here, so.
Yeah, and I know that's an issue facing, I think, a lot of our teams who were planning to bring students to the US for the summer and the fall. So that's something obviously we'll keep monitoring as a group. And, you know, I think when we asked everyone to send us their sort of COVID plans, adjustment plans, one of the issues that we've been discussing out of those is how we facilitate training for our graduate students internationally. And so if that, if we can invite them to some of the virtual classroom sessions that are being held at our universities, that's something that I think we need to work together as a group to figure out. So yeah, let's move on to, I think this is our final presentation before Dave gives us a little wrap up. Brad is going to be presenting work that they're conducting in Senegal with young farmers.
Thank you, Jessica. So yeah, I'm presenting on our project, which is retaining the next generation farmers in the Senegalese groundnut basin. And that's our PIs on this project are Katim Toure, who I know has been attending this conference, but isn't here today, unfortunately. Tamsir Mbai, Katim is at ENSA, which is the National Agricultural. If I'm back further, is that better? So Katim's at the National Agricultural University, ENSA. Tamsir Mbai, who's with the National Agricultural Research Institute, ISRA. Pierre Diatta, who was a MS student at Virginia Tech. Let's see, I'm trying, maybe if I turn down the mic. Well, I'll try my best here. Is that better? And then Genti Costantini, who's at UGA, and myself at Virginia Tech. So we're 1 year into this project, so a lot of what I'm presenting is work in progress. And as we saw yesterday, there was in Ghana and Malawi, there was projects discussing the importance of addressing risk, and that's certainly true in Senegal. In the groundnut basin, you have a very variable production environment that comes from rainfall, temperature, pricing variation, insecurity in land tenure in the longer term. All these things create a risky environment for production, and that generates economic costs, or what we can call risk costs. And you can think of that as, in a sense, what you'd be willing to pay to not face that risk, and it's kind of like what you pay for the premium on your auto insurance. So we're interested in how these risks are deterring youth participation. How about that? Is that better? No?
The quality's not great, but we can follow you, Brad.
Okay. Yeah. I actually have to, I've tweaked my audio so my guitar plays on it well, and that may be what's the problem. Okay, so what we're doing is we're trying to quantify the economic costs that this highly variable production environment generates in the Senegalese groundnut basin. And particularly, we're looking at the costs that come from climate variability and land tenure options, and the limited availability of kind of secure land tenure, and particularly what those create for young adult farmers. And then, and the longer term goal for all of that is we want to identify viable technology and policy options which hope to reduce those economic costs. I should also point out that when I talk about young adults, I'm talking about young people who are between 16 and 29 years of age. So the specific objectives of our project then are one, to analyze historic patterns in weather variability, and particularly to use those to characterize risk in the production environment due to climate. Two, to document participation, production, land use arrangements of young adults in the groundnut basin using secondary survey data. And there's a good amount of secondary survey data available for Senegal, as many of you may know. The problem with that is almost none of these surveys separate out, when they're looking at groundnuts, the production that's being done for the household as a whole and what's being done for individual fields. So often the household will have a field which is used for household needs, and then individuals within the household have their own field, which essentially they can keep the profits or some of the profits from. And young adults usually are household heads, so they are operating these individual fields often, and that's where their incentives come from. So if we don't understand that differentiation, we don't understand the incentives very well. And then because of that problem with secondary data, we also implemented a survey of 1,125 households and the young adults in those households, where we're specifically looking at their groundnut production practices, constraints, land tenure arrangements, and we have a particular focus then on the distribution of inputs and outputs to individuals within the household. So who's involved with what and who receives money from what in the production process. Then based on that survey data, again, we're going to try to measure the economic costs of a variable production environment and that insecurity in land tenure and what generate for young groundnut farmers. So, and then in the longer term, we're going to use that and working with ENSA and ISRA to identify potential economic impacts of policies and technologies that can address the constraints of young farmers. Like most projects, we also have an objective for graduate training at the MS level, and particularly training for applied economic analysis and groundnut production systems in Senegal. And then finally, to disseminate results. Okay. In terms of the climate data, to date, what we've done is we've downloaded historical rainfall, temperature, NDVI data to identify problematic areas for groundnut production, and that's both looking at the trends that we see, such as increasing temperature in the groundnut basin, but also trying to cross-sectionally identify areas where we have particular kind of problems that are particularly problematic, such as areas with, that tend to have prolonged dry spells relative to other areas. We're also trying to implement a water requirement satisfaction index, which takes the temperature and rainfall data and runs it through and can tell us if that the year has been favorable or not in that area for groundnut production. In terms of the secondary data analysis, and Genti Costandini is leading this part. He's been working with the demographic health surveys for 2011, 2017, which are very large samples, and pulling out the young adults and looking at their arrangements in the household. Some of the kind of findings that he's has, and all of this is still preliminary. If few young adults or household heads or own land, we see very pronounced gender disparities among young adults, females being less likely to be the household head, to own land, to be self-employed in agriculture. And we also see, in terms of formal registration, female children are less likely to have birth certificates, and lower or less wealthy families are less likely to have birth certificates. So right off the kind of bat, one of the concerns that is generated here is as you talk about moving towards formal land tenure processes, and that you do have a potential for those to be inequality exacerbating, not inequality reducing in terms of both wealth and gender. A second data source that we're looking at is the poverty survey for Senegal, which the ESPS owns. So that survey contains 1,876 household heads who are groundnut growers, and we're using that to look at groundnut harvest, sales, and input. But still, again, with this survey, we don't have information on intra-household distribution, which are so important for young adults in terms of the incentives and constraints that they face in groundnut production. Then in terms of primary data collection achievements to date, in January, February this year, we implemented a survey, and in the end, we ended up with 1,123, not 25, households in 75 villages. Okay, and that was led, Cat Team, Toure, Thompson and Bai, Pierre Yada played a big role in supervising that data collection. So this map here shows where those surveys are, and these are population-weighted random samples of rural villages we chose, 75 of them in the provinces of Kaolack, Kafrin, and the Department of Kompentun in the province of Tambacounda. Within that, then we've been able to date match 1,000, and actually I think we have 10 more now, 1,096 households. We've matched a young adult who did an in-depth interview with us along with collection of data for the whole household. We should be able to match some more, but we aren't going to match everyone, and part of that is, although we're pretty close, part of that is because we programmed the survey to the tablets that they would randomly choose a young adult because we wanted to avoid any gender bias in who was chosen as the respondent as the young adult. And that seems to have worked pretty well in the survey because in our analysis, 57% of respondents in the sample are young adults or female. And again, early analysis, most of them participate in groundnut production and want to continue to participate in groundnut production. In terms of the households, we also, we're still cleaning the data, but we also, one of the things that we did was really interesting is we identified for all the households the groundnut fields. And in this case, we have 1,047 households, which we've been able to map all groundnut fields to. And again, we're still cleaning, so we hope to push that number up to closer to our 1,123 households that we have in the survey. And the enumerators did is they actually walked out and physically walked the groundnut fields and mapped them using a GPS mapping device. So we have 3,272 groundnut fields that are mapped. And this diagram here is you can kind of see if you look at the little dots. I don't have a pointer with me, but we have one labeled there, household 14. If you can see it, it's the hatch, kind of amber color there. And you can see most of the households, that's the village. That's where they're clustered for the Kurasafadi, this village in the Kafrin district. And then we can see where the spatial allocation of the groundnut fields is for the whole household. And we also know which members of the field are working on which of those, which household members are working on which fields. And you can see here, let's go back. You can see here that some of these fields are quite far apart. If you take that whole bar at the bottom, that's what 0.8 kilometers, right? So you have fields there which are over 5 kilometers from the village, which farmers are cropping for groundnuts. So and so we're working on now putting this all into a relational database. So we have our household data, we have our groundnut field plots, and we have it all integrated in a database. And I think this may be useful for some of the remote sensing issues we were talking about yesterday from Malawi and how to identify groundnut fields, because we have here geo-referenced about 3,000 some groundnut fields. Okay, in terms of COVID-19, it really didn't interfere with our survey. It was finished literally the week that Senegal started to shut down. But what it has done is it's slowed data cleaning somewhat, particularly getting back to the original data, which got separated from Pierre, who was kind of supervising the data cleaning process. So we've slowly kind of been addressing those problems as Senegal opens back up. We're moving forward with data cleaning. So then on training, we have 2 students at EMSA who have been identified for MS thesis support, and that's starting this summer. And we'll be working on the theses of youth and groundnut production. We have 1 Senegalese student who's identified and been admitted for MS training at Virginia Tech, and it's essentially, I think, the same story as we've heard from other people. If that will occur in the fall or in the spring, it's a question of visas and the opening of the university and a number of things at this point. But we have that. And then we have a student at UGA, a U.S. PhD student who's working particularly with the secondary data analysis at this point. Proposed future activities in the short term here, I think we're working with the secondary data sets and establishing links between climate variability, land tenure and security, and youth groundnut participation and outcomes. Particularly interested in the question too of what role climate variability plays in the migration of young adults. In terms of the primary data analysis, again, right now I'm working on generating some profiles of youth participation in the groundnut sector. We're also identifying factors associated with youth participation and youth productivity in the groundnut sector. And really I'm trying to relate those to insecurity of land access, climate variability, and gender differences. So, and then in the longer term, exploring how the spatial layout of land allocation is related to groundnut production outcomes, and particularly within that, the question of are young adults' outcomes constrained by poor spatial allocations of land? And that's a really interesting kind of new question for us. We're trying to get our heads around at this point. So, and then in the long term, again, relating the data and the information we generate on the costs of risks facing households to evaluate technologies and policy impacts of young adults. And then finally, looking towards the future, we're really excited with this data set. We think we've built a strong database, and we're interested in trying to develop a second panel year of this, where we can look at groundnut allocation, household groundnut allocation responses to changes in weather and changes in other factors. The most important one at this point being COVID-19, because we think we really kind of have a very good base for doing that. So that's where we are.
Good, thank you, Brad. We've got about 3 minutes left, so if you can see the chat box over there, Cynthia and Isaac have a sort of related question.
Let me look. Let's see. I'll start after the feedback. I'm sorry about the feedback. I hope you got better.
I think you're going to be forced to play us a guitar song next time we meet.
Okay, Tom's here. I'll let is our land tenure expert, so I'll let him handle that. Let's see. Yeah, I have to think about financial costs versus economic costs and the difference. Certainly within the, I mean, we can account for the input costs in the survey. What we didn't collect, and that, you know, I think there's potential to really work with the stewards group in that, is we didn't collect intensive labor measurements of activities. We know who worked on what field and what activities they did, but we don't know how long. So I think, you know, we can come up with maybe some better cost estimates if we try to pool some of their estimates with ours in the long run.
Great, thank you very much. I do think that there is a lot of linkages, obviously, between your projects and Stuart's. I know that when we were collecting that data in February, we didn't actually get a great sense, not nearly as granular a sense as you did, of where people's groundnut plots are located, how far they are from their houses, how many they have. So yeah, I think that there's a lot we can do between those projects.
And we're really excited about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of good overlaps, I think, both gender and youth, and yeah. they're well aligned. Well, thank you. We're actually right on time. We've got about 10 minutes left before the end of our program. So I think that Dave has some comments he'd like to make to close us out here today.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Yeah, I mean, I think despite the little bit of the audio problem that we had in the last presentation, I've been quite impressed how well the entire 3 days have gone, given that looking at the attendance list, we've had over 95 participants online every day. And sometimes I think we were over 100 at times. So I think, again, that shows that we can work virtually and there's some definite benefits, and we definitely want to look at how we can capitalize on those, I think, moving ahead. Because I don't think we would have had near this participation if we'd have been in person. I think, I think what I take away from these 3 days is hopefully that everyone has now a much better understanding of what all is going on across all the projects in the Peanut Innovation Lab. As you can see, there's about 23 projects currently in operation in various stages. And it's a wide breadth of activities from genomic research all the way to the work that we're doing in social sciences out there, interacting with households and farmers directly. I think, as I said at the beginning, when we were looking at how to set up a replacement for our in-person meeting, clearly we realized that this would not take the place of all the types of things that you can do when we're together in a meeting setting. But I think hopefully now people have been able to find those 2 or 3 other projects where someone's doing something similar or complementary to what you're doing, and you can now reach out to them. And I would encourage everybody on the call to do that. I think what is, to me, unique about innovation labs is that everyone here is part of the innovation lab. Each person has a project. PIs have a project that they lead. People are working in their own country, in their own topic area, but we're all part of a larger effort called the Innovation Lab. And as such, everyone has the ability now to reach out and take advantage of what other people are doing, whether it's in your own country and put a different project or other countries. And so everyone should feel encouraged to do that. If there's anything that we in the management entity can do, rest assured we'll be more than willing to try to help that. It's something that I know Jamie and Jessica and I do all the time, is look for these opportunities and suggest them, encourage them, but everyone here should also feel that they have the ability now to do that. And that's, I think, one of the goals from having a meeting where we spend 3 days, 3 hours each day and listen to a number of presentations about what's going on. So hopefully that did come out. And if we only set up one other really great collaboration, and I heard several examples in the comments where, yes, I'd like to reach out and understand a little bit more, maybe we could work better together. So that's really, one of the key objectives. And I think we did that from what I can see. I think it was a good opportunity to do that. I'll just remind you that everything has been recorded. We've tried to capture all the chats and questions and answers that have been posted. We'll be working to make both the videos and those chats available along with all the presentations, and Allison will, I'm sure, be in touch once we have those ready to go on wherever we're going to be posting them. We will be going through all of the questions and answers that were in comments that were made in the chat here over the next couple of 3 days, and making sure that we try to reorganize them so that they kind of flow a little bit better. So they'll be grouped where you'll have a comment or a question and the relevant other discussions and answers to those. Where we see that maybe we could benefit from having some additional feedback from the PIs or the project teams on particular issues, we'll reach out to them as well, so that we'll try to use that as a really decent written record of feedback on all of our projects. So we'll be following through on that as well.
We also are planning to distribute a survey here shortly. This is obviously a new endeavor for us, and I think a new endeavor for many of us. And so we'll be sending out something here in the next day or two. And we request everybody who participated to fill it out. We need to get some feedback on how well it went from your end, both from issues around connectivity and just the technology side of things, but I think as well, what did you think went well, what didn't go as well? What are the benefits? And because going forward, I don't think this may be the last virtual meeting that we're going to have in our project, but we really want to know how could we improve if we do this again, and where could we be doing it and using it even more in the future. So look forward to that survey, and please send us your feedback and complete it as soon as possible. Just some other little minor details. I mean, we didn't, as normally when we would get together, you would receive probably a fairly boring presentation from one of us in the management about all the administrative issues that you have to deal with. We decided that probably wasn't appropriate or necessary for the time that we had over these 3 days. Clearly, if you have any issues, please reach out to any of us in the management entity, and we'll be happy to work with you and try to get them resolved. We're continuing to work as best we can from home, but we're here to help make things go forward. I know that we've had some of the people from PyStar on our call, and you know, that's been great, and we will continue to use that system, and so hopefully now they have a better understanding and put some faces to names and projects to modules and things like that. So we hope that will improve that. I think the only minor administrative issue that I'll just mention is that particularly today, we've heard some very good feedback on how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting many of our projects. We have reached out to all projects shortly after this began restricting travel to get some feedback, and we've been continuing to discuss that internally and with USAID. And I think the one thing that I can make sure that all the projects are aware of is that you know, extending the project at least from a no-cost perspective is quite feasible, and we're already discussing that with many of our projects to see just how much an extension would help them complete the objectives. We'd rather seek out opportunities to actually increase the length of the project so that it can complete what it's you know, has as a goal to achieve, rather than look at how we can cut out some objectives. So if you think that would be useful, make sure you're in touch with us, and we'll be obviously reaching out to many of you as well. But as I said, if there are other things that we can help you with, please feel free to contact any of us. The last thing I'll say is a bit of a plug. David Jordan and I are co-guest editors of a special issue of the Agronomy Journal. It was just launched a week or so ago, and it'll run until I think the end of next year, 2021. And the title of that special issue is Peanut, a Promising Star for Feeding the Future. It's a fairly broad set of topics that we're willing to cover. It's in the breeding and genetics section of the Agronomy Journal, but we've made it clear that we'd like to cover as much of the work that we're doing across the value chain as possible. We're already trying to entice some authors to provide both some reviews, but as well as some contributed manuscripts. So there's a lot of good research going on in the Peanut Innovation Lab and elsewhere. And we hope that we can capture a lot of that in the Agronomy Journal. In fact, if we capture enough articles in that, they actually will create a book out of that special issue, which I think would be quite a good thing to accomplish, particularly to raise the awareness about the importance of peanuts. We all know that, but we still need to get that message out even more clear. So contact David or I if you're interested, and we look forward to seeing a lot of the research that we've heard about being contributed to that journal. The last thing I'll just say is a lot of thanks to everybody. I think it's been really good to see so many people online. All the presenters, I think, did an excellent job of telling us what they're trying to achieve, where they are now, and some good ideas about where we're going. Appreciate all that work. I know it's sometimes not as easy to send your PowerPoints before your presentation. It's one of the problems, I think, and difficulties with challenges with PowerPoint. You can edit your PowerPoint almost while you're giving it. But I think we tried to make sure that the one thing we had heard on Zoom sessions is the more we can have all those beforehand and can kind of control them from a single point, saves a lot of screen sharing, which is one of the challenges with these virtual meetings. So appreciate all that. I also would just like to thank our external advisory panel. Some of you may have seen and heard that several of them have been able to participate. I think all of them have been on at some time over the course of the 3 days. And so it's always good to get their input into our projects. And so we really appreciate them taking the time with them, and we'll be working with them to get their feedback as well. I think also Siobhan Leonard, who is our AOR, and Daniel Bailey, who is the alternate AOR, were on from time to time. They obviously have many things going on in USAID, as you can imagine, but I know they participated as much as they can, and we'll be communicating with them as well on the outcomes from this meeting for sure. Lastly, I'd just like to really thank Allison in particular. She was the one that was controlling all the slides, making sure that everybody was connected, and put a lot of effort to make sure that this would be a success, capturing the recordings, and we'll be working on getting those edited. So won't have a lot of blank moments in them, but will really be a good recording of what we've done. So thanks a lot, Allison. And of course, Jamie and Jessica for chairing the sessions, and all the management entity, of course, have been working hard to make sure that this is a success, which I think it was, but we'll listen to the feedback that we get as well. And last but not least, of course, to everybody who participated. Hopefully you found it was slightly easier than traveling long distances to a meeting, but maybe you missed the ability to interact socially, and particularly I think what we really missed was the ability to go out to the fields, see a lot of the research firsthand, because I know that's oftentimes the highlights of these types of events. So we definitely don't want this to be the only way that we interact in the future, and we sure hope that we will be able to interact in person and be able to do that visits to the field and research sites just as soon as possible. So in closing, I hope that, I know I speak on behalf of all the management team and probably all of us on this call, I hope that we can see everybody again just as soon as possible, but most importantly in person. So main point, take care, stay safe, and thanks again for making this a very, very successful event.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Everyone, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye all.
Okay.
See you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hi, it was great fun, and thank you to all the presenters. Great presentation.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.
Bye from Senegal. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Au revoir. Au revoir. À la prochaine.
Merci.
Au revoir, à la prochaine.
From Senegal. Bye bye.
Bye bye, au revoir. Allez, bye. Ciao.
Allez, bye from Senegal. On va quitter. Voilà.
Bye.